All right, here's the last one. We talked a little bit about the boundaries,
Yeah.
and people wanted us to unpack that a little more. We actually had 2 requests and just said, hey, can you unpack boundaries a little bit more? I think I'll preface this by saying that Alex and I are not experts when it comes to perfect boundaries from a biblical and scriptural lens. Hey, as a follower of Jesus, how do I have boundaries with other people that allow me to live a life full of joy, peace, vitality, great relations with other people? We're just not experts in that realm. However, we're going to talk about it and we're going to share truth regarding this. And I think it's going to be a good conversation. So, AC, let's dive into this
Oh
one for a minute.
man. I mean, we started it last week, and to be honest, I haven't thought about it since, but I would just kind of piggyback what we talked about as far as I remember this phrase when I was reading the book Boundaries, is that love requires freedom, because if I were to force you to love me, it's not authentic love. But in the
And you
freedom,
do.
in the freedom to love you or love one another, we need to have clear delineation or clear boundaries between you and I, so that I have the freedom now to cross over my square here in my recording and now empty myself to love you. So when it comes to the boundaries conversation, one, we need to know where those lines are. We need to know, honestly, one of the biggest takeaways for me, and honestly in development of marriage and just relationship, is I need to own my pie. I need to own my slice. I need to be responsible for me, and I can't be overly responsible for you. And that's a boundary. That's what we have to recognize and articulate when it comes to how do I love but not at the expense of emptying me, or where do we draw that line. Is first we need to articulate, hey, this is Trevor, this is me. This is Trevor's responsibility. This is Alex's responsibility. This is my slice of the pie to own. This is your slice of the pie to own. Because when it comes to the gospel's invitation is to come and die. It's not, like we said, it's not so that our lives may be great. Jesus says to pick up our cross. So we need to empty ourselves. And when it says come to die, we are putting to death the fleshly desires that are within us. Because we have the flesh desires and the spirit desires, we're putting to death. Paul uses the words crucify the flesh in Galatians, which is such a powerful word. Like, we are to put to death those desires so we can now willfully put someone else in front of us and love them well, to the point that God is honored, but not at the detriment of me. Where when I say not at the detriment of me, meaning my health, my safety, my needs, my family, my protection, that stuff. Not at the detriment of my selfish pursuits, because a lot of times on the other end of love is selflessness. So it's not selfishness, it's selflessness, putting you first. But for me, I'm not going to do it at the expense of my own health, because if I do, I'm just running dry. I'm pouring from an empty cup, and then I can't love you well because my cup is empty. So I do think the biggest takeaway for me is I need to learn what is Trevor's to own. I need to know what is mine to own. But then outside of that, I'm going to do everything I can to love well.
And I think a good way to kind of put those together is there's love and then there's limits. And he talks about that in the book, but we had to unpack both of those scripturally. The world would say love is honestly, whatever you feel like doing, like whatever emotionally is in your heart, whatever I want to do for that person, whatever I have the desire to do. If I don't have the desire to do it, then that's a form of love, because it aligns with my emotions and my own personal feelings. Scripturally, that is not what love is. We look at Jesus. Jesus is not doing what he feels like doing. He is doing what is required for the love of that person. And it's both extending grace at times, and then it's also calling someone up. And and just like you said right there, calling someone to own their responsibility. And you could see that with the disciples. You could see that with different people that he engages with. And I think what is really important is that we have to recognize that love, just like you said, is not selfish. It is intended to be selfless. But if we are if we're pursuing our own benefit always, then we're not really loving people. And I think there's also this weird distinction that thinks if we, and I don't know what it is, maybe it's just the way that culture positions this, but if we don't, like, if we call people to own their responsibility, to live up to the expectation, their end of the bargain, however you'd want to, kind of phrase that if we do that for them, we're not loving them. And I don't think that is love. I think we're ignoring one's own personal responsibility, and that's being then put on to someone else when they're never designed to do that. Now, I do think there are some things that, you have young children, Alex. They don't, their responsibility levels are like almost zero,
Minimal.
But at the age of 24, Crew's responsibility level looks totally different than it does right now.
Right.
And it's with a parent and child, it's designed to progress. Like, look at the way that God created the family dynamic and created parents, and encourages the parent to raise the child in the ways that you want them to go, but also to love them and not to be overly harsh. Proverbs and Psalms both talk about that. So we could talk a long time about this. I think this is a great conversation.
I'll recap it really quick and sum up what you just said and I just said in one sentence. Both truth and grace are expression of love. Culture only mainly focuses on the grace and shies away from the truth. But truth and grace and truth are both love.
Yeah, let's put that in a scenario. Let's put that in a scenario between the two of us and say, we had previously discussed, hey, Alex, you more than 10%. You got this 50% of responsibilities for what we're trying to do, and for HOLO Health, the responsibilities of business. Trevor, you've got these responsibilities.
And that's my slice, that's your slice.
Exactly. We'll just go 50-50. Look at the pie, right? And if all, time and time again, I am not managing or owning my responsibility to 50%, it is not loving for you to always pick up my slack.
Yeah, I'm taking advantage of you. That's not love.
Yeah, I'm taking advantage of you, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's not loving for me to do that to you. And regardless of what is going on, that is not what we agreed upon. That's not me owning my responsibility. That's not you owning your responsibility. And that's not loving to the other person. Context, though, what people always want to figure out is like, yeah, I know that. Like, I understand that. What's next? Well, a conversation has to be had. If there's a boundary being crossed, a conversation has to be had.
Yeah.
Or boundary being broken. And the conversation, how you approach that conversation, is an expression of love.
Yep. You have
exactly. And when we say in love, what I mean is not like, Trevor, I love you, man. It's saying, hey, Trevor, is everything
to build
okay?
up, not to tear down.
Yes, but also you have to understand someone's perspective. I think it's really important to understand, because what if I was going through something? You ask the question all the time, how's your soul? What if you didn't ask me that for a month? And then, you were doing 75% and 25%, and this is part of what we talk about, assuming the best in other people. You assumed the worst, and then I'm just neglecting it. And then you start to have this conversation, and I tell you something that is super traumatic that I'm going through right now.
Right.
Then I'm like, dude, we need to separate for a while.
Trevor,
and then
are you going through something traumatic right now?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Thank you for asking that.
That's fun.
But I think it's really valuable when you go into a conversation like that to seek to understand how the person is doing emotionally, and just choose to love, understand. And that's part of being connected in community too, is you've got a pulse on that. But if you're not always connected with that person, you go into that conversation and you're understanding and sharing and expressing these things out of a posture of love. Hey, Trevor, I love you. This is something that we talked about, and I just want to know. I want to know what's going on. How can I help? Would it be helpful in this season if we kind of shift some things around? What can we do? Because what I want to do is make sure that we're on the same page,
right,
and owning our responsibilities. that's going to hit totally differently than you coming in and saying, dude, you got to start doing what you said you're going to do.
You suck.
Because then I'm really defensive at that point.
Exactly.
Right. And then we're going down a rabbit hole.
Here's the last thing I'll say, then we need to move on, is the biggest gap in this dynamic that I see is making assumptions rather than communicating. Because like we said, one is defining the terms, 50% responsibility, 50%. And this is a hypothetical situation, but I own half the pie, you own half the pie of what we need to do. And this could be in marriage, this could be work, this could be any relationship. But if we don't define the terms and we don't say, hey, clarity is kindness. These three things are you, these three things are mine. There's our responsibility. Then we are assuming who's doing what three. And if we don't define that, and like you said, I'm doing 4 and you're doing 2, now there's a lot of guessing. There's a lot of assuming the worst rather than defining the terms, having conversation, bringing clarity to that, because now there are clear expectations on what Trevor's going to do and what Alex is going to do. That is going to avoid many, many future conversations down the road because there was clarity and less room for assumptions. And then, and like you said, both grace and truth are expressions of love. When I slip up on one of the 3 things in a week, Trevor extends me grace because life happens. But if that happens time and time and time again, that's when that truth conversation comes out, like you said, in love, to help me pick up my responsibility and give my feedback on underneath me. So we have to use habit number 4, increasing clarity, using self-awareness on what the Spirit needs us to do the most in this situation. Maybe it's more grace, maybe it's more truth. It all depends.
Yeah, good. We'll button that up there. If you want to learn more about it, go check out Dr. Henry Cloud's YouTube or his website. Great stuff.
I'm buttoning it up right now.
All right, buttoning it up.
Well, this isn't a button,
Alex.
But this is a boat.
That's okay. All right, to cap off this episode, we're going to dive into the 3 and 30 that when you listen to this was shared on November 2nd. Last week, November 2nd. First thing that Alex shared.
Do you want to share the screen? We can read them, or do you just want to list them and talk them through?
I can share